Dr. Michael Andrews had spent over 4 decades inside the bright, sterile walls of operating rooms, his gloved hands steady over open hearts, his mind anchored in measurable fact. As a leading cardiac surgeon in Boston, he had seen life dangle on the edge of death more times than he could count. His world was one of numbers, blood pressure readings, oxygen levels, EKG spikes. He believed in evidence, not emotion. Spirituality to him was a comforting illusion for the dying, not something a man of science needed. Heaven souls angels. Those were beautiful stories people told themselves in hospice beds. He never mocked faith. He respected it, but he didn't believe in it. At 62, recently semi-retired Michael finally gave in to an old longing. Before med school, before his grueling residencies, he used to hike Colorado's rugged trails with nothing but a backpack, a thermos of coffee, and the sound of wind through pine trees. So on a crisp November morning, he strapped on his boots and set off solo to summit Bear Peak near Boulder, a modest 459-foot climb he had done in his youth. It was meant to be one last personal challenge, one last breath of wild freedom. But that morning, the trail had turned slick with black ice. Near the summit, as he reached for a snow-covered ledge, his boot slipped. In an instant, his body fell more than 30 feet, bouncing off jagged stone before landing twisted and motionless in a shallow ravine. His ribs shattered. His head cracked against a boulder. The air was thin and cold, barely 20 degrees. Hours passed before hikers discovered his crumpled body. When search and rescue arrived, Michael had no pulse, no breath, no signs of life. He had always believed death was the end, just a flick of the switch, neurons firing one last time before fading into silence. But in those 6 minutes when his heart stopped, something happened that would shatter everything he thought he knew. The surgeon who trusted only what he could see was about to see what science had never prepared him for. Dr. Michael Andrews always thought death would be a blank screen, a silent fade to black. But what happened after his fall on Bear Peak was anything but nothingness. One moment his broken body lay motionless among the jagged rocks, the cold creeping into every inch of flesh. The next he was standing floating above the ravine, staring down at himself with a clarity sharper than anything his aging eyes had ever known. He wasn't in pain. He wasn't afraid. He simply was. The sky above him glowed with a strange brilliance. Though there was no sun, the air shimmered not with temperature but with presence. Michael realized with a jolt of impossible truth that he had no heartbeat, no lungs breathing, yet his awareness was more alive than ever. He saw the rescue team scrambling down the ridge, heard one medic yell, "We've got no pulse." He watched as they worked on his chest, his limbs limp, his face pale. It was surreal watching your own death unfold from the outside. Then something shifted. From behind him a warmth began to pulse, not like heat from a campfire, but like the memory of every good moment in life rolled into a single feeling. It wasn't light in the ordinary sense. It was light that carried intention, intelligence, love. Michael turned, though he had no body to turn with, and saw what he could only describe as a veil of brilliance opening in the air. Beyond it, something waited. Someone. He was being pulled, not forcibly, but like a tide drawing him home. Time, space, weight, none of it mattered anymore. There was no beeping monitor, no sterile hospital smell. Just peace. A peace so profound it silenced every question he'd ever asked about existence. Michael, the rationalist, the skeptic, the man of science, was being ushered into a place he never believed existed. And still, somewhere deep within, he felt the quiet whisper of something sacred. Not a dream, not a delusion, but a call. a call to see what lay beyond the veil of this world, beyond medicine, beyond logic, beyond death itself. As Dr. Michael Andrews drifted beyond the veil, the world of snow, stone, and science fell away like old skin. What greeted him next was not darkness, but a radiant tunnel, wide, shimmering, and alive with color. It wasn't the sterile white corridor he'd once dismissed in medical textbooks or patient anecdotes. No, this tunnel pulsed with warmth like the sun rising over an endless field, wrapping him in a sense of familiarity he couldn't explain. He wasn't being pushed. He was being drawn not against his will, but in agreement with something deeper than words. He passed through layers of sound like music without instruments, tones that resonated not just in his ears but in his being. Peace soaked into his soul like rain on dry earth. There were no walls, no boundaries, just a knowing that he was being welcomed. Then just ahead the tunnel widened and the light grew so brilliant he instinctively braced for pain. But the brightness didn't hurt. It healed. It filled. And then he saw him. Standing in the heart of the light was a figure not cloaked in robes or golden crowns, but in a radiance that made every part of Michael's being weep with recognition. It was Jesus. Not the portrait from his grandmother's living room or the stained glass image from childhood Sundays. This was Jesus, as eternity remembered him. His face not etched with suffering, but glowing with compassion so deep it could unravel a lifetime of pain. His eyes held galaxies, yet looked at Michael as if no other soul existed. Michael expected shame. He had spent most of his life brushing off religion, replacing belief with reason, faith with formulas. Yet in that moment, all he felt was love, pure, unfiltered, eternal love. Not earned, not bargained for, given freely. As if Jesus had been waiting for this reunion not with disappointment, but joy. You are not lost. The voice spoke not aloud, but directly into Michael's consciousness. You were never alone. Tears that didn't exist fell from eyes he no longer had. In that sacred encounter, all of Michael's doubts, his fears of dying, his questions about suffering, they melted. He had come face to face with the one his mind had denied, and his soul had always longed for. And for the first time, Dr. Michael Andrews understood heaven was not a myth. It was home. As Jesus extended his hand, the brilliant light around them began to shimmer like ripples on a still lake. Dr. Michael Andrews, still overwhelmed from his face-to-face encounter with the Savior, now found himself moving, not walking, not floating, but simply being alongside the one who embodied eternity. Together they entered what Jesus called the Gardens of Peace, a realm unlike anything Michael had ever imagined, even with his years of scientific knowledge and philosophical musings. It wasn't just beautiful, it was alive. The air seemed to breathe, filled with golden light that moved like a melody through the trees and streams. Flowers bloomed in colors he couldn't name, and the breeze carried no chill, only a gentle awareness, as if love itself had taken form and now passed freely through every blade of grass. Around them were souls radiant, whole, at peace. Some sat by shimmering waters, others walked in quiet contemplation. But what struck Michael most was the stillness, not the absence of sound, but the presence of rest, of complete harmony. These were souls who had lived lives of love, service, humility, whose actions, however small on earth, had created waves of kindness that echoed into eternity. Jesus turned to him and said, "They did not seek greatness. They simply loved." Michael's heart tightened. In all his striving degrees, accolades, medical titles, how often had he truly loved without condition? Then, without warning, the scene changed. The gardens faded into a vast chamber of light and sound. Souls moved with purpose, each surrounded by scenes from their earthly life, not memories but fully immersive life reviews. Michael watched as one soul relived a single moment, handing a coat to a homeless man on a freezing night. But the scene didn't stop there. That man, warmed by kindness, found hope, then help. Years later, he started a shelter. Hundreds were fed, clothed, given a second chance because of one forgotten gesture. Jesus turned to Michael again. "Nothing is wasted," he said. "Every act of love sends ripples." Then Michael saw another scene, a different soul. Someone who had spoken a cruel word in anger to a child saw how that wound traveled through decades of pain and insecurity. Our words, Jesus whispered, can either heal or harm for generations. And then it came his own life review. Michael stood in silence as moments unfolded. Patients he'd treated, colleagues he'd ignored, the kindness he'd withheld out of exhaustion, the prayers he once mocked. And yet woven into every scene there was no condemnation, only clarity. Jesus wasn't showing him to shame him. He was showing him so he could understand. Overwhelmed, Michael dropped his gaze. "I didn't know," he said. Jesus replied, "Now you do." In that moment, Michael felt something crack inside: pride, perhaps, or fear. But what replaced it was deeper purpose. Every act mattered, every breath counted. Even the smallest kindness could change eternity. As the vision of his life review gently faded, Dr. Michael Andrews stood in silence, his soul still trembling from the weight of revelation. He had expected judgment, shame, perhaps even punishment. Instead, he had been met with compassion deeper than the ocean, and clarity that pierced through every defense he had ever built. Before he could gather his thoughts, Jesus extended his hand once more. "There is something else you must see," he said, his voice as steady as the sunrise. In an instant, the scenery around them shifted. The glowing gardens and chambers of learning dissolved into a new realm, one unlike any Michael had seen before. This place pulsed with a soft, soothing light, almost like the breath of heaven itself. The atmosphere was warm, but not with heat. It was warm with presence. He felt the vibrations of healing, as if every particle of the space was designed to mend what had been broken. Souls moved here too, but not in celebration or study. These were the wounded ones, the addicted, the abused, the bitter and the broken. Michael watched, stunned, as luminous beings surrounded them, entities of pure light, their every movement radiating gentleness. There were no sermons, no lectures, no reprimands, only understanding. Michael saw one soul weeping silently, his form curled in anguish. A being knelt beside him, not to scold, but to simply be there. Light poured from its hands and touched the hurting soul, not burning, but healing. The pain didn't vanish instantly, but it lifted like a burden, shared and slowly erased by love that asked for nothing in return. Some carry wounds that run deeper than memory, Jesus explained. They have believed they are beyond redemption, but no one is too lost to be found. Michael's eyes welled. He thought of patients he had treated, people struggling with addiction, mental illness, or simply despair. He'd done what he could for their bodies, but often felt powerless when it came to their spirits. And now he saw what he had never understood. Heaven did not turn away from pain. It ran toward it. Then he saw someone familiar. His own father. The man had died bitter, estranged, angry at the world, and especially at Michael. But here he wasn't angry. He was glowing faintly, surrounded by light beings who offered no judgment, only peace. His father looked at him not with rage, but with sorrow and love. Michael gasped. For years he had carried that brokenness inside, and here it was being healed. This realm, Jesus said, is where the wounded come, not to be forgotten, but to be restored. Michael's heart thudded with truth. The mercy of God was not passive, it was active, intentional, and constant. Even those who had resisted love on earth were not abandoned. They were pursued, not to be punished, but to be made whole. And in that moment, Dr. Michael Andrews, once a man of science, reason, and doubt, began to weep. Not out of fear, but because he had never known love like this. A love that refused to give up. A love that never let go. Just as the tears from seeing his father began to still, the realm around Dr. Michael Andrews began to shift once more. The soft luminescence of the healing sanctuary faded, giving way to a space that felt colder, quieter, less vibrant, but not void. At first he sensed distance more than darkness. The colors here were muted, as if love itself was holding its breath. Then he saw them souls, standing at the edges of the light. They weren't weeping. They weren't raging. They were hiding. Jesus stood beside him still, his presence the only steady warmth in this place of hesitance and shadows. These are the ones who have not yet accepted healing, he said, his voice heavy with compassion. They are not condemned. They are waiting. But many have been waiting for a very long time. Michael's eyes scanned the realm. He saw people who seemed frozen, wrapped in layers of guilt, pride, fear, and shame. They weren't trapped by chains, but by choice. Some had clenched fists, others crossed arms. Some paced restlessly, while others sat in silence, staring into the distance. All of them looked like they were listening for something, hoping for someone, but unsure how to respond when love finally reached for them. Then one scene took his breath away. A woman stood at the farthest edge of the light, trembling. One of the radiant beings stepped forward, hand extended, not to demand, but to invite. For what felt like an eternity, she didn't move. Then slowly, painfully, she raised her arm and touched the hand of light. The moment their fingers met, the shadows around her cracked. Not shattered, cracked. Like a stone, slowly remembering it was once soft. A tear rolled down her cheek, and with it came a glimmer of radiance. Michael couldn't look away. "Why do they stay in the shadows?" he asked. "They can see you. Why don't they run to you?" Jesus answered with a sorrowful smile. "Because some believe they're unworthy of light. They mistake my mercy for a trap. They think I'm waiting to judge, not waiting to heal." Michael felt that truth land in his chest like a bell struck in a cathedral. He thought of patients he'd dismissed, people he'd written off as too far gone. Addicts, inmates, cynics. But here, even they were not abandoned. Love had never stopped reaching for them. Then Jesus spoke again, this time with a resolve that echoed across the entire realm. "Love is not forced, Michael, but it is relentless. It knocks on every door, every day, in every heart, even here." Michael's spirit shook. He thought of how easy it had been to categorize people, to decide who was good or bad, deserving or lost. But in this place there were no easy labels, only stories, wounds, choices, and mercy. As they turned to leave, Michael looked back at the realm of the lost, now glowing ever so slightly brighter than before. He understood something then, something that would mark him for the rest of his life. Redemption wasn't reserved for the few. It was the constant invitation extended to all. Even in silence, love kept knocking. The warmth of the realm lingered as Dr. Michael Andrews felt another shift, not in color or temperature this time, but in urgency. Jesus turned to him, his expression grave yet filled with patient love. "There's one more thing you must see," he said. And in an instant, Michael was no longer standing in those realms of healing and restoration, but floating high above the earth, as if viewing it through the eyes of eternity. What lay before him wasn't just land and sea, it was a tapestry of souls woven together in threads of light and shadow. He saw homes, hospitals, churches, battlefields, each pulsing with spiritual energy. In some places the light blazed bright and strong, families praying together, strangers offering kindness, a nurse comforting a dying patient. But in others the light flickered, dimming under the weight of bitterness, fear, and indifference. There the shadows crept, subtle but determined, feeding off division and distraction. The battlefield wasn't made of guns or tanks. It was made of choices, small daily choices of love or selfishness, truth or compromise. Jesus spoke, and his voice echoed not in Michael's ears, but in his soul. Humanity stands at a crossroads. Two futures stand before them. And with that, Michael was shown a vision of what could be. A world where people chose compassion over control, where technology served good instead of greed, where children were raised in safety and purpose. It was breathtaking, a glimpse of what the world was meant to be. But then the vision shifted. The colors grew cold. He saw division escalating into hate, families torn apart by lies, faith replaced by convenience, and power wielded without wisdom. Nature itself groaned, forests burned, oceans bled, and hope was traded for comfort. And through it all, people walked blindly, unaware of the spiritual war around them. Tears welled in Michael's eyes. "Is it too late?" he asked. Jesus placed a hand over his heart. "No, not yet. But the time is short." Then he leaned in, his gaze steady. "You must go back. Tell them what you've seen. Remind them they are not just bodies passing through time. They are eternal souls with eternal purpose." Michael trembled. "But who would believe me?" Jesus smiled, a smile filled with sorrow and certainty. "Some won't. But one will. And that one can ignite 1,000 more." Suddenly Michael felt the pull again. The realm faded. The warmth receded. And with a final whisper, Jesus said, "Love is not a memory, Michael. It's a mission. Now go." With a jolt like lightning, he was back, lungs gasping, heart racing, tears streaming, reborn not just into life, but into purpose. Dr. Michael Andrews' Journey Beyond the Veil reminds us that life is far more than breath and motion. It is a sacred tapestry stitched together by the choices we make each day. For those of us in the later chapters of life, it's tempting to wonder if our best years are behind us, or if our quiet lives still carry meaning in a noisy world. But Michael's testimony offers a powerful truth. Every act of kindness, every prayer whispered, every moment of forgiveness matters. The unseen realm is watching, not with judgment, but with love. And our decisions ripple far beyond what we can see. His experience reveals that the struggle between light and darkness doesn't play out in grand battles, but in kitchens, churches, and conversations, in how we treat our neighbors, speak to our children, and respond when no one is watching. The lesson is clear: we are never too old, too small, or too late to make an impact. Love isn't a feeling we store away. It's a daily choice, a lifelong mission, and the most powerful force in creation. Even when the world feels dark or distant, God is still reaching, still calling, still preparing each of us for something eternal. Whether you're rocking a grandchild, making a phone call to a lonely friend, or praying alone in the night, you are part of a divine story that stretches into forever. So live intentionally, love deeply, and trust that what you do, no matter how small, echoes in eternity. The time to shine is not past. It is now.